Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie and I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, I'd like to start this by reading a short prepared statement.
Please go ahead and do so.
In our last episode on the Beatles' Taxman from the album Revolver, I gave a lot of opinions about George Harrison's views. However, I would like to apologise to the audience of Beatles Stuffology because I neglected to use the one book that I think is possibly my favourite book on music that I've had, and in fact I've used in teaching for well over a decade now, and that is 33 Revolutions Per Minute by History of Protest Songs by Mr. Dorian Lynskey, a truly brilliant book. So in order to clarify and support my opinions, I would like to read the following element from the appropriate chapter. While the Beatles' first political lyric was the unedifying Taxman, 1966, George Harrison's petulant moan about the Wilson government's sky-high top-rate tax, Lennon was awestruck with the rest of the sentence doesn't really matter. It's that first bit that's important. So I apologise to the listeners for not having done my diligent research, and most of all, I apologise to Mr. Lynskey for not quoting from his absolutely superb tone. End of statement.
Thank you very much for that statement, and I'm sure he will greatly appreciate that clarification and correction that you have chosen to forthwith issue.
I was so annoyed for forgetting that I had the book, and I fully intended to use it. And then I was absolutely delighted when I reminded myself of the fact that his opinion of the lyrics is basically the same as mine, i.e. the correct one.
Okay,
anyway,
good.
Yes, moving on
Yeah,
talk about a sharp turn in the album. We move on, don't we, to the song that I think probably so far has more mythology behind it than any other Beatles song. I think up till now, I think Norwegian Wood has a fair bit of, Dylan-esque type mythology to it. And Yesterday has the whole scrambled eggs woke up with a fully formed song kind of thing to it. And also, was it something that he had a couple of years before? Bit of mystery. But now we have Eleanor Rigby.
yes, the mighty Eleanor Rigby. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, mythologize is about as good a word as you could pick for this song. It's a really interesting one to sort of discuss, and I hope we're going to get a good discussion out of it. I mean, I always hope that, but particularly for this song, because it's one that I think is worthy of that kind of attention. But just to kind of start us off, I mean, what's your overall feeling towards it? And do you remember how you came by it?
Don't remember if it was something that I would have heard played in the car as a kid on, Radio 2, whoever the person that came before Ken Bruce would have been in the mid-morning program. Um, yeah, I'm almost certain I would have heard it then. I don't know how I would have reacted, bearing in mind when we were talking about Taxman, I spoke about how influenced I was by people like the Jam when you're 10 years old, and then Duran Duran and people like that were really important, and I did get into the synth pop thing. So I cannot possibly imagine now what I would have thought as a youngster hearing the strings. And that's I could invent a memory, say, oh yes, it was so jarring, or this, that, and the other. But I don't know. And we weren't really used to hearing strings in pop or rock at that point as well. Moving from the whole prog in the 70s, punk influences, then new wave and new romantics. We'd kind of gone away from strings in general, I think, hadn't we? So
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of it around at that time, not from my memory anyway.
no, although you would always have an artist who was going a little bit serious, perhaps by having some strings. Although that said, Tug of War, there's parts of the Tug of War album that starts to get into that sort of thing, and then Pipes of Peace as well. Especially the end of Pipes of Peace. But I don't remember it being something that was done by any of those bands who were particularly influential. Not until at least later on in the decade, when perhaps we, sort of, hey, media fans, we had the uses and gratifications theory going on, where we'd all matured together, and we could then accept moving into slightly more sophisticated realms. Um, but but it strikes me now that if I can't remember what it was like hearing it for the first time, I wonder what it would have been like in '66 hearing this for the first time. Because I'm sure on Help there would have been some Beatles fans who would have been aghast at Yesterday. And then when you're listening to, I suppose, Rubber Soul, which has soul elements and rocky elements, and then you listen to Taxman, you get that trepidation of listening to the new album. Oh, what's it going to be like? Oh, Taxman, phew, that's okay. We're back on rocky territory. And then you get Eleanor Rigby. I wonder if they would have been, growing up and been ready to accept that, or whether it would have been slightly jarring. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it probably would have been. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, sort of to go back to what we were saying right at the start of the episode about this being a sort of very mythologized song, but there's a lot of evidence from contemporaneous writing around Eleanor Rigby that people really did take it as being like a genuine step forward in what pop music could do, and I don't know. Maybe jarring isn't quite the right word, but it would certainly be something which pushed at the boundaries of what you could imagine a band like the Beatles doing, or what you could imagine an album like Revolver achieving. I mean, that's the thing. People talk about Revolver as like, oh, it's like the greatest guitar album of all time, and yet the second track on it is nothing but like a string octet and Paul McCartney. I suppose a couple of backing vocals as well, but that's all it is. And I mean, I obviously adore this song. That kind of goes without saying, I think. But the idea that it would be, yeah, this kind of new horizon of how music can exist, I think, is one that the song can bear. And obviously, it's not the only song that will do that on this album. We've sort of touched on Tomorrow Never Knows when we were talking about Rain, but it does kind of the same thing, but in a completely sort of different manifestation. It really pushes at the edges of what can be achieved within pop music. And I mean, I have a horrible feeling I came to this song from a collection of Beatles oldies, because it's on there, and I definitely had that before I have had Revolver. I have a very I mentioned this before, so I'm apologizing from repeating myself, but very vivid memory of having difficulty listening to Yellow Submarine as part of Revolver, because it just didn't sequence the way that I was used to hear it, because I'd listened to that damned album hundreds of times on like my Walkman or whatever, and it took me a while to kind of integrate that song of all songs, not Eleanor Rigby, but Yellow Submarine, into my sort of, eventually it settles down, and right now fine, it's part of Revolver. And I'm like you, I don't really remember a point where I came to this song. There must have been a time when I first listened to it, but I have no memory of that. And I have no real connection to it, as like there are definitely some Beatles songs I remember listening to and just having my breath taken away, or just really feeling that impact. But weirdly, this isn't one of them, and I don't know why that would be, other than not coming to it from the album, but coming to it from a cheap compilation. But yeah, I definitely think there's more than enough evidence to suggest that if this wasn't jarring, then it was definitely a whole new frontier.
Perhaps we'll come back to a little bit of contemporary reaction later. But what we haven't actually done yet in that opening 5 to 10 minutes is provide an opinion. And that's quite rare for us.
Yes, given that we're an opinions-based podcast. All right, well, what's your opinion, Andrew?
It's bloody clever. It is really, really clever. And that's something that I probably wouldn't have appreciated 30, yeah, 30, 40, 30, 40, 40, 30, 40, yeah, something like many decades ago, is the cleverness of the arrangement in particular. And I think it is the cleverness of the arrangement that is absolutely fascinating. because I think the song itself is probably quite straightforward. And I think if we were to have a more, I'm going to say, traditional, like pop rock arrangement to it, it would be a good Beatles song. It would be a really good Beatles song. We'd be talking a lot more about the lyrics than anything else. Um, but I think the way in which um, it's arranged just is fascinating. The way it rises and descends, the way it kind of drives some of the emotion behind it, and the way in which it can then open up other areas. I mean, I did read somewhere that it's meant to have some similarities to Bernard Herrmann's Fahrenheit 451. But it actually reminds me of his score to North by Northwest.
Yeah, I can
Um,
see that. Yeah,
and
that
then
makes
there's
sense.
elements of Psycho in there as well, and it's that staccato element to it that is so different than if you had a rhythm guitar playing underneath it. It lends it a drama that I don't think the band arrangement could possibly have managed.
I'm definitely on board with that as well. And it's one of the rare occasions where I think having the string only, which is on Anthology 2, the strings only, is
Okay.
really, really worth listening to because, again, you can hear just how smartly that's been put together by George Martin. It's an astonishingly well orchestrated piece. And having it without the vocals on it or without anything else on it really kind of throws that into the light just how effective you are that it is. Yeah, you're right, it knows exactly where and when to emphasize, when to pull back. It supports the lyric. Like, it's such an intelligently written piece. I almost think to the point where and we'll talk about lyrics and who contributed what later on, no doubt, but like you could almost say it's like a McCartney Martin song at this point because that string, or those strings rather, provide so much of what really is the core of the song, the emotion, the melancholy, the despair, all the emotional beats that the song are hitting. Now, obviously, that's not to diminish the significance of the lyric because that's where it all comes from. But the strings work so intelligently to support that exactly where it's needed and to draw out the drama of what's going on. It's one of George Martin's absolute best scores, and it really is breathtakingly good.
Although apparently it is based on a McCartney suggestion. The mythology behind it is that he'd recently been introduced to Vivaldi by
Yes.
Jane Ash's family, and he had an idea for the arrangement and took it to George Martin, who then went and did the rest. And what's interesting about that is I mentioned the contemporary reaction. There was a review by Mr. R. Davis of Muswell Hill that you might be interested in. He was asked to review the whole album, and on this song he said, "I bought a Haydn LP the other day, and this sounds just like it. It's all sort of quartet stuff, and it sounds like you'll like this, sounds like they're out to please music teachers in primary schools." I can imagine, he says, I can imagine John saying, "I'm going to write this for my old schoolmistress." Still, it's very commercial. It's fair to say that Ray Davis didn't have the most positive view of the whole album. But I think that is, I mean, it's withering and dismissive. And I also wonder if there's a slight element of well, these days we'd refer to clickbait, wouldn't we? Obviously, in 1966, clickbait was not a thing, but it's that kind of thing. Let's stir up some
Yeah,
controversy,
intentionally provocative, let's
and that
say.
is controversy with a K.
Well, of course, because it is, after all, the Kinks. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I know it's not like Ray Davis to be a bit of a dick. I mean, perish the thought. But do you think maybe there was just a little bit of a hint of jealousy there as well? I mean, it's not like the Kinks aren't achieving astonishing things up at we're at the point of dedicated follower of fashion and stuff like that in their back catalogue, and they are probably the third best group after the Beatles and the Stones in the UK music scene. So it's not like they have anything to be ashamed of. But I sometimes, Ray Davies is always, he always has an attitude about him, shall we say? But he doesn't. He's got. There's no shame in being, in that position. He's an astonishingly gifted songwriter, and I do wonder if some of that opinion is maybe a little bit jealousy creeping in
It,
there.
it is noticeable that I think the Record Mirror and I think it's Record Mirror. No, Disc and Music Echo. Apologies. This is a scan on the Paul McCartney Project website, and they go through quite a lot of contemporary reaction, and in general, it is pretty positive, and which is at least good to see. If you just bear with me for a second, I'm going to zoom on in because my old eyes just can't cope with writing that small. Oh no, it can't cope. I'm not going to zoom in. Just basically to say people like Spencer Davis and Manfred Mann and Steve Marriott and Alan Freeman and Jonathan King were asked their opinions, and there's an awful lot of talk about maturity and sophistication. So maybe Ray Davis was also trying to put himself apart from everybody else. But what was interesting was that there's kind of a response to that. George Harrison was asked about why they put this and Yellow Submarine out as a single. He said, we just thought we may as well put it out instead of sitting back and seeing dozens of cover versions all getting hits. Well, we might as well cop the hit as well as anybody else. I believe there are about 93 versions of Good Day Sunshine being put out. Apart from that, we think it's a good commercial single. I like them both. Yellow Submarine will appeal to old age pensioners and that kind of mob, whereas Eleanor Rigby will probably only appeal to Ray Davis types.
What a very polite way of saying "get fucked."
Yeah. So I do often mention the fact that George can be a snide little so and so from time to time, but actually I love that.
Yeah.
I'm all over that, George. I'm quite happy for you to bite back from time to time. Um, yeah. So contemporary reaction, and actually, what's interesting is contemporary reaction from their I don't want to say peers, but
Yeah,
people
yeah.
in the same profession.
I think peers is
Was
probably the right word, isn't it? That's
well, it
okay.
is. Well, peers kind of suggest equal, doesn't it?
Well,
And surely the Beatles have no peers.
anyway, yes. It's also kind of fascinating that this is the single that follows paperback writer Rain. I mean, talk about tonal shift, and we've talked previously in the podcast about the idea of not releasing songs from the albums as singles, and obviously this marks a shift away from that approach. But I mean, if you're going to pick one, this is the one to pick. But it's so tonally different from either paperback writer or Rain that again, for all the praise that it gets, both obviously contemporaneously and now, it must still have felt like quite a shift in terms of what the band were doing. And I mean, it was number one for a month, I think. So it clearly worked, and that's phenomenal. I mean, it's sort of, in a way, it's almost hard to imagine a song like Eleanor Rigby being number one for a month, but that's what it achieved. And
In the UK,
it's
not in the
in the
US. It
UK,
didn't
yes, I
reach
should,
number one
yes.
in the US.
No, no, neither this nor Yellow Submarine did in
Yeah.
America. But yeah, in the UK, it was number one for 4 weeks, I think. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see that kind of that jump. It's such a hard cut, if you like, between the two styles. There are definitely songs that could have been released from Revolver that might have bridged that gap a little more cleanly. But it's like, no, well, no, this is the song. This is what we're doing. Boom. And it's all the better for it. I love the fact that they're prepared to sort of go that hard on the shift.
And shift in many ways in terms of orchestration, but then also in terms of tonal shift,
Yes.
in terms of the lyrics as well. Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating all round that that they were coming up with such mature ideas quite so quickly into their career. It's really fascinating to sort of see that progression, and it's also really fascinating to get another one of those really concentrated, determined, thought out McCartney lyrics. Because I am just consider, yeah, it's yeah, whatever. I'm thinking of it as a McCartney lyric, whatever Lennon liked to say.
I think we can safely assume Lennon was full of shit when he was trying to claim credit for this, because basically nobody seems to support his assertion. And I think that was in the 1980 interview that he said, "Oh, I wrote 70% of it, or whatever." And most of that interview seems pretty straight down the line. This just seems like something he made up.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the fact that that the first verse is McCartney's. So yeah, and that after that it was pretty much just his. So the first verse was his, and the rest are basically mine. And then he has a little moan about the way in which McCartney asked for help. Apparently, McCartney, he was there with Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall, and McCartney just sort of said, "Oh, anyone want to have a go at finishing this off?" But yeah, yeah, he does seem to be claiming that. And Craig Brown, I mean, this is again where we get into the mythology. Craig Brown then talks about the fact that he thinks that it's Alan Klein who basically suggested to Lennon that he had written more of it than he did, and as a result, to to sort of think about the end of the man who shot Liberty Valance when the legend becomes fact, print the legend, and Lennon continued to print the legend, believed in the legend. It's kind of interesting as well because it's quite abstract. Bearing in mind, Lennon talks about how I'm only comfortable writing about me, and later on in that interview he talks about, I think it's Lovely Rita. He talks about, oh, it's one of those sort of stories that McCartney comes up with, but I can't come up with it because I can only write about truth and I can only write about me, which of course is nonsense. In fact, it's only a probably
Self-mythologizing.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's not a criticism of him. It's just how can you write that many songs and make that sort of statement and think that it applies to everything, especially when you do end up nicking lyrics straight from billboards and newspapers later on and admit that. So that's fine. And do you know what? The point has just slipped from my head, so
Okay.
I'll now throw it over to you with a cheeky lips. What do you think of the lyrics?
I think they're phenomenal, and I think it's a real, indicator of what McCartney is capable of achieving. And I also think of this as being a McCartney lyric, at least in part because, like, okay, clearly the bulk of it just is the fact that he has, like, allegedly taken a line from Mal Evans or a line from Ringo. Doesn't mean that it isn't a McCartney lyric either. I think that's the thing. He's still assembling it. He's still making creative choices as to what to include or what not to include. So if Ringo really did contribute the line about darning his socks in the night when there's nobody there, he's still making a creative choice to say, well, that's a really good line. I'm going to include that, even if he didn't necessarily come up with the precise wording of it. And I still think it's very clear that almost all of this lyric is McCartney, even if it is a couple of lines drawn in from other places. Like you say, this kind of narrative lyric isn't really something that Lennon particularly does. And especially, even when Lennon does do it, they tend to be sort of fairly first person. I mean, the next song we're going to be talking about is I'm Only Sleeping. And there is a sort of narrative in that song, but it's first person. Obviously, we don't have that perspective in Eleanor Rigby. But also, there's something about the way that McCartney constructs a lyric, which just, it has his... I'm trying to avoid the word resonance here, but it has his fingerprints all over it, and that's exactly what Eleanor Rigby does. I know there's a lot of talk around the lyric when it comes to, I forget who it was that said it, but it's like a Samuel Beckett play, or that kind of minimalism and all that kind of stuff. Okay, I mean, sure, like I get what that's going for, even if it's perhaps slightly overstated. But the strength of the lyric here is how much is said with how little. And that's one of the things that McCartney, when he puts his mind to, it is really, really good at achieving. It's a phenomenal lyric. And if you compare it to something like, say, "Cry Baby Cry," which clearly is, we've mentioned it before, but we've talked about its Lewis Carroll influences. But it's a very profoundly John Lennon song. You could never assume, if McCartney turned around one day and said, "Actually, I wrote most of that." You'd never believe him for a bloody second. It's so keyed into Lennon's worldview, Lennon's kind of artistic influences, all those kind of things. And I think Eleanor Rigby does exactly the same things, but obviously from very different influences. It's an astonishing lyric. It really, really is just. Again, I don't want to get. It's hard to avoid sounding like you're just repeating the mythologization of it, but it's hard to think of many McCartney lyrics which are equal to or better than this. It's genuinely moving, and that's not something you can say about a lot of McCartney lyrics. But there's a real genuine sense of despair, hopelessness. It's quite brutal in places. It's a really, really effective and powerful piece of writing.
Yeah, we can add other names to the list of people who may have had some influence. Pete Shotton is one that
Yeah,
gets mentioned. Donovan is one that Craig Brown it sort of intimates had an impact. The story is that McCartney went to Donovan's flat and played him this new song. So the suggestion is that there may have been some influence there. Um, but who knows if the influence was very much subconscious as well, because again, with the mythology, there's this whole element of the names as well. And what this amazing coincidence is that Eleanor Rigby is a name that appears on a headstone in a graveyard in Walton, which I think was that not also the church where
yep,
yeah, the Beatles mythology kind of almost starts, isn't it? Where they played their first show. I think
yeah.
yeah,
The
well, the
Faith.
church fete where they met was there, and there was Father Mackenzie, or apparently, so there is a heck of a lot of coincidence and possibility to it, and whether it or not it is coincidence, I don't really think it matters a whole heap. But there are people who have written books about this song, and actually to make a link to my view of Taxman and some of the things we said about that in terms of other songs that go on. And what's noticeable, and I haven't read it, fortunately, it's because it's currently unavailable. But Colin Campbell, professor of sociology at the University of York, wrote a book about Eleanor Rigby. And I think the fact that it's a professor of sociology is relevant, because you can talk about this fitting in, and that's that sense of loneliness and all the lonely people and changes in society and changes in culture is fitting in with a lot more forms of representation of working class, lower middle class culture, and we would have hinted at the whole kind of new wave cinema, the kitchen sink dramas of the 50s into the 60s. I mean, I can almost picture a Billy Liar type scenario in relation to this. You've got the shift from love to loneliness, which is actually an article on the Beatles story museum website. They have a story about that, where they even do a little bit of content analysis, bit of transactional analysis, where they talk about the Beatles are globally proclaimed for preaching of happiness within their music, as the abstract noun of love is the most common Beatles lyric, appearing 312 times in 42% of their songs. And then saying, well, here we've got something that's about outcasts within society. Okay, that's great. And it is that element of difference that helps to make the song stand out, whether that's the difference in the orchestration, the difference in the lyrics. I will let people choose. But the fact that we can mythologize behind it, and we can still be reading articles on the BBC website about the condition of the tombstones or even there was something about the fact that at some point I think there was some talk about selling off, or there is a little bit of a tradition after a certain number of years of some graveyards becoming reused in order to free up space, and I think there was some talk of that happening with that graveyard as well. It's really, really fascinating just how stuck into this you could actually get. And I say could actually get because that kind of hints that I don't know how comfortable I am with getting in amongst the weeds. I'm sort of a little bit happier saying, look, here are some of the weeds. Dear listener, if you want to go and have a look in some of the weeds, you go have a look and see what you can find. But we're 31 minutes in, and we could probably talk about, I mean, if Colin Campbell can write a 150-page book on it, we could probably do a couple of hours if we really wanted to.
Yeah, I think we could. I think we could as well, but I'm not sure how our listener numbers would stand up to that kind of length. Having said that, though, I mean, the fact that it's possible to do that, like you say, it kind of tells its own story. That there aren't, there aren't that many songs in the Beatles' back catalogue, or in anybody's back catalogue really, which can stand up to that level of scrutiny and that level of analysis. And I think it's kind of interesting to see McCartney move himself in that direction as well. Again, I mean, I love Paperback Writer, don't get me wrong, but it's if not flippant, it's a fairly light lyric, especially sort of compared to this. And that was the last McCartney song we touched on, and then we move forward to this. It's kind of really fascinating to see that kind of development as he kind of starts to explore something which really does break away from the traditions of the genre that he's working in. And I think it's one of the, sort of in a slightly broader sense, one of the great sort of joys about Revolver is how much it kind of moves away from the template that has kind of been the case up until Rubber Soul. I mentioned I'm Only Sleeping, but yeah, you couldn't imagine that song even one album earlier, to say nothing of, say, She Said, or Tomorrow Never Knows, or even really Got to Get You Into My Life, which is a whole phenomenal McCartney song of its own. It's astonishing how quickly he's developing. And I mean, we've touched on Jane Asher and the influence that she's had, and her importance to this story before, and it does bear mentioning again, because it's hard to imagine that McCartney really would have gone so far in this direction had it not been for a lot of the kind of artistic stuff that he's soaking up for, in his time with her. You mentioned that she'd introduced him to Vivaldi, which of course is supposedly an influence on the orchestration. But it's also to McCartney's credit that he is open-minded enough and intelligent enough to be able to absorb those influences and then do something with them. I don't, again, mean this to sound like a criticism, but I don't imagine that's something that, say, John Lennon would do. He's more egocentric when it comes to his songwriting. He's much more centered on the self, and that's not to say that he's incapable of it, but the results would be considerably different than what we get in Eleanor Rigby. So yeah, I think it's also worth just touching on how much McCartney is absorbing those influences and how well he is able to do it. But in a way, that is also logical, because we've seen that even up to this point, we've seen how good he is at taking what is around him and working with it. And sometimes that's the granny music that Lennon is so dismissive of, the old 20s tunes of his father's jazz band, the kind of musical numbers, like Till There Was You and all that kind of stuff. Like, we know that McCartney is amazingly good at being able to take influences from the things that are around him and build something out of that. Generally speaking, a lot of that up until this point has been, those old music hall numbers or stuff from musicals or whatever. But now that he's moving in circles which are maybe a little bit more theatrical, which are maybe a little bit more highbrow, which are a little bit more classical, he's doing precisely the same thing. And this is the result that we get from it.
Face in a jar, the public and
Exactly.
private persona. The Vivaldi thing is
Yes.
quite interesting because you'd almost consider Vivaldi perhaps now to be the gateway drug of classical music, the entry
Yeah.
level, which is really unfair, and I suspect mostly comes from the fact that people's experience of it, perhaps in this country, people of a certain age will be Nigel Kennedy, um, or possibly even as an alternative to Mendelssohn's Wedding March. Um, so yeah, and in fact, probably fair to say that most people experience of Vivaldi is not the Four Seasons, but the one in particular that does get played at weddings. But
Yes, and indeed, when you're stuck on hold.
oh, really? Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, it's very, 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 very common that if you get stuck on hold when you're calling a call center, you get stuck with a tinny version
Okay,
of the well, I was going to say the Four Seasons, but yes, like you
the
say,
one
one
season.
season in
Um,
particular.
but of
Yeah,
course, the Ashers, I'm sure, would have been introducing it to him as a terribly sophisticated piece of classical music to expand your horizons. Um,
doubtless,
Doubtless.
doubtless.
So, things change, don't they? Which is uh, the way of the world, and things that certain Mr. Farage forgets. The world changed, and not everything from the 1950s is worth aspiring towards. There you go. Right. Okay. Don't know where that came from. That's probably a sign it's time to develop a slightly different line in the conversation. But I think actually the one thing that you can then sort of build on in terms of the sophistication of the lyrics is the fact that you have a dual narrative that comes together. Effectively, you've got two separate people who both have something in common in terms of their lives, but then also in terms of a situation in which they are both together and yet apart, which is pretty clever, really. And like you say, quite theatrical, maybe reflective of the world in which he moved. And I can't imagine that being a piece of groupthink. It really feels like it's much more something that would only come from, the idea of one person.
Well, absolutely, and it's also the bleakest part of the song, which is just incredibly effective. I mentioned before that the lyric can be quite brutal, but that final verse, buried along with her name, nobody came, and it's so simple, but it carries so much power with it. It's such an evocative image. Just one minister at a graveside, just brushing his hands. There's nobody there. You can imagine it's a cold, windy kind of December day. It's astonishingly bleak, and especially coming from McCartney of all people, who's not generally known for indulging in kind of bleakness and that kind of misery. But it's unbelievably effective, and like you say, it dovetails the narrative of the two characters that we've had together incredibly effectively, but in a way which is absolutely sort of unrepentantly downbeat. And it's a phenomenal way to kind of end a song like this. Also, particularly because it ends on a question: where do they all belong? It allows yeah, it doesn't even really allow for catharsis or for closure. It leaves the question open. The question is left open in the minds of the listener, and that's a really nice little narrative trick as well that the song pulls off.
It feels unusual to have something that is this, we'll say, bleak, but played at this tempo. It's just not a traditional thing, is it? You'd sort of imagine if you're going for something a little bit somber, then you would signify that with something a little slower, a little bit more maudlin in terms of pace. So the I think the upbeat nature of it actually works in its favour. It's that sort of slightly counterintuitive, but perhaps oh God, this is going to sound terribly pretentious, accentuates the sadness of the lyrics. Oh God, can we please move on to something else quickly, or I'm going to get so pretentious it's untrue.
Well, but this is a song which allows one to aspire to pretension when discussing it, and but that is part of its greatness. But yes, all right, let's move on to something else. Cover
I was
versions.
just reminded then, as you were saying that, of a song by, oh God, I'm trying to remember the band now. But the song is called "This Is Not" the Franken Waters. Thank you. Yeah.
Love the
This
Frankie
is not a
Waters.
song is an absolutely amazing song. This is not a song about politics. This is not a song about sex, and so on and so forth. Yeah. I quite like that sometimes when things point out what they aren't. Oh, right. Yeah, covers. Good idea. I'm gonna uh, right. So
I think we pulled that
I'm gonna
off.
mention three. And they're two are very different from the original. One isn't, but for reasons you'll understand. There's a sound check that Oasis did, I think, for the Letterman show. I may be wrong, where it's just effectively Noel Gallagher and the drummer who Tony Carroll. I can't work out which drummer it is. It might be Alan White, um, and there is a bass player in there as well. And it's just the guitar is kind of replicating some of the strings, but it kind of works in a, he's singing it, but he's a little embarrassed to be doing it because it is a soundtrack, so it's not really meant to be recorded. And what's interesting is it doesn't really sound Beatlesy, which is not a thing I would say about Oasis. Um,
No, that's
and
unusual,
then Ray
to put it
Charles,
politely.
I have to mention Ray Charles, which is just such a fascinating interpretation. Obviously, piano based, and then you've got brass as well. But the way in which he sings the song, where he pauses, the intonation is fascinating and lends it a new weight that is really, really interesting. I do have one more that we're going to mention. I think you're going to mention as well, but I know that you want to mention friend of the show, old Babs.
Yeah, I definitely want to mention Barbara Dixon, who we last encountered when we were talking about Rain. But it's really worth drawing attention to her cover of Eleanor Rigby as well, because it's really unusual. To be clear, I love the Ray Charles version of Eleanor Rigby. Of course I do. It's a really really amazing cover version. And as we've again mentioned sort of many times before, but it does exactly what a cover version should do. It reinterprets the song, but it manages to keep the essence and the whole of it. The Barbara Dixon cover also does that, but in a completely different manner. So it's essentially just almost the entire song is just her singing with one kind of very long held, almost kind of sinister sounding note beneath it. And it's an amazing cover version, genuinely quite spine tingling. And I mean, obviously I'm a fan anyway, but I really think it's an incredible cover version. There's a little bit of harmonies, vocal harmonies, just on the last "All the Lonely People," I think, before the final verse, and then there's a tiny little bit of flute just at the end for emphasis. But almost the entire song is just her voice and this slightly unsettling single note underneath the whole thing. It's really, really something, and it's just such an excellent reinterpretation of the song. It doesn't have that preciousness that a lot of cover versions have about Beatles cover versions. It's very it's very unique. I haven't really ever heard another cover version of Eleanor Rigby quite like it. It's if you haven't listened to it, it's well worth listening to. But yeah, the Barbara Dixon cover version of this is really astonishing.
Slow it down to accentuate the sadness.
It does slow it down, but I don't think it. The tone is a little bit different. I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like a criticism, and it's not. But the Beatles version is melodrama. It's quite a melodramatic song, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I like melodrama. It's fine. I'm a Doctor Who fan. Of course, I like melodrama. But that's what it is. It's very melodramatic. The Barbara Dixon version is slower, but it's going for a different tone. It has that slightly unsettling feel to it. It's not going for sadness. It's not going for the bleakness. It's going for something which is slightly more unsettling. And that's another reason that I really like it, because it's not going for the obvious slow it down to make it sad approach.
It's interesting you mentioned melodrama because the other version that's worth mentioning is a cover by somebody you may have heard of. a Mr. P. McCartney, yeah,
Name sounds familiar, yeah.
which is on the soundtrack for and in the film of "Give My Regards to Broad Street." Now, I,
Yes,
I,
the cinematic
well, I will
classic.
confess I have like all bar about maybe a couple of thousand people, I have not watched the whole film. However, I have now watched the cover of, I'm going to call it a cover, in reinterpretation, reimagination, whatever you want, of Eleanor Rigby, and including the film sequence that then comprises Eleanor's Dream. And Eleanor's Dream is, it's just bliss. It is, I mean, it is melodrama. It's pure Victorian melodrama. Um,
100%.
and even including sets that look like they're straight out of a Muppet Christmas Carol. It is just wonderful, and there is so much acting going on. I mean, there's a wonderful bit of Ringo Starr in a rowboat going over the edge of well, a waterfall that seems to appear from nowhere, which is quite interesting. And the look on his face, it's just pure acting, so much acting. And then when McCartney is following around someone in the darkened streets of Dickensian London, all sort of top hat and cloaks, and the acting he's doing, it's just amazing. The eyes and the tilt of the head, and then another move of the eyes, and the few shakes. I mean, it's just exquisite. It's absolutely exquisite. But I'm sure George Martin would have been delighted when McCartney came along and said, "So, doing this film, I'm gonna do, gonna stick Eleanor Rigby in there again. Let's do basically the same orchestration, but a little bit different. And I'm gonna, and if you could also do an instrumental version as well, and turn it into one of those suites that you so like doing with Beatles songs, that would be absolutely double thumbs aloft, absolutely magnificent." And George says, "Sure, sure, I'll get my quill." And get his quill he did. And it is just bliss, absolute bliss.
If the whole film had been that, more people might have actually sat through it. I think it's probably the only bit of Give My Regard to Broad Street that's really worth
It's
anything.
fun.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But it's fun and artistically worthwhile are not necessarily synonyms of each other. I really like the performance when it's him and the string quartet in. I think it's the Royal Albert Hall, isn't it?
Yeah, that
And
is
they're
part of
on
the
the
sequence.
stage
Yeah,
just kind of by themselves at the start of it.
the sound
Although it's a
design
bit
is that
weird to see him.
the sound design of that is useful as well, because as the camera pulls back, it does the sound does get quite echoey. So they
Yeah, absolutely.
that's definitely clever. But even then,
Yeah, it's
there's
weird
some
to see him sitting strumming on a guitar whilst he's doing
yeah,
it,
that
which is a bit odd. But okay, I get. He probably didn't want to just stand at a microphone. But yeah, I quite like that. It's quite an effective way of emphasizing the loneliness and just him and the quartet in this vast echoing empty hall where just occasionally somebody will glimpse down from like the upper circle or something like that. Yeah, I kind of quite like that. I think that's quite an effective little sequence.
anyone has the right to do a song in a slightly different way, it's the person that wrote it. And I think more people should, I mean, not necessarily go to Bob Dylan style extremes, but more people should, reinterpret things. And again, not in a George Harrison taxman way, but actually go, you know what, I didn't like that lyric when I first wrote it, so I'm going to do something new. I think artists could be a little bit braver rather than, just literally doing the song that they wrote when they were 17 in the way that they wrote it at 17. Do something a bit different. So, credit to it for at least giving it a bash.
Absolutely. I do also just want to touch on the Yellow Submarine sequence for Eleanor Rigby as well. I don't want to linger on it too well. I love the Eleanor Rigby sequence in Yellow Submarine. I think it's really, really great. I really like that style of animation anyway. I really love it. And I suppose it's sort of, people talk about it being proto-Python-esque or whatever, but there is a lot of that kind of overlap. I'm not going to go into a lot of that kind of stuff about it, but really do like that style of animation, and I think it works incredibly well for this song. It's possibly the most effective sequence in the film. I don't know. I haven't seen Yellow Submarine for a long time, but I did watch that segment before we recorded this, and it's really great. It really manages to capture the song, and that slightly hyper real sort of photograph mixed with animation style fits this song incredibly effectively.
I struggle with Yellow Submarine. I think it's sort of up there with things like The Karate Kid, The Godfather, and Jaws. And The Shining. And I don't think I've seen more than a few minutes of it. I think I struggle with Yellow Submarine
Mm.
because of the voices brackets lack thereof.
Yeah, no, that's
So
understandable, I
and I
think.
think once I knew that it's not them, shh, spoiler, it's not them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell you who does a really good cover of Eleanor Rigby. You would be surprised to know this. The Analogues. We I
Oh,
was just
okay.
saying
Well,
we are getting into the territory where these are this is the era that the Analogues, when they were going, were focused on through to the end, because their raison d'etre was effectively to do the songs that the Beatles didn't play live themselves because of their technical difficulty and so on and so forth. So much like pretty much, in fact, dear listener, just imagine that for every other song we are going to talk about from here on in, there is a really good version of the Analogues doing it, because there just is.
yeah, that's always going to be the case from now on, I think. Yeah. Good. Anything else you want to cover as far as this song is concerned?
Oh, I mean, well, yeah, we could. I mean, we could. Do we want to go into the backstory of young Eleanor herself? How we went from Father McCartney to Father Mackenzie to Olna Gurning or whatever it was. I mean, does any of that matter?
I don't really. I mean, I'm sure there are podcasts better than this one that can cover all of that kind of pedantic detail in a great deal more depth and clarity than them we're likely to manage. But at least we've acknowledged that it exists, so it's not like we don't know about it. It's just that we probably don't need to talk about it all that much. I mean, again, sort of get looping round
Yeah.
to the mythologization. I think so much of that kind of material is kind of so well known at this point. I'm not really sure if it's desperately necessary to rehash it all. And I kind of think in some ways it's better not to, simply because I think it can act as a bit of a restraining factor on, I never said restraining bolt there, I don't know why, but a restraining factor on the discussions of the song. Like if you get too bogged down in the, oh, but was it Miss Daisy Hawkins or blah blah blah, blah, or I don't know. I feel it sometimes pulls you away from kind of like the reality of the song and actually being able to discuss it further.
I think the reason for the mythology is purely because, and I'm just going to flick through Revolution in the Head to the early part of the Beatles' career and just pull on a random page. You're not going to believe this. It's because, unlike 38B, Mr. Moonlight, it's actually a really good song. So much of the I could have flicked through, even I love I Should Have Known Better. I Should Have Known Better is a fantastic song, and I Love Her is a fantastic song, but they're not as good as Eleanor Rigby. So the mythology wouldn't follow if the song wasn't as good as it is.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
think
the
that's
important
true.
thing to remember. Hence why the South of England jury gives this 9 points.
9 points. Okay, very good. That is interesting. What am I going to give Eleanor Rigby? I think I think the Celtic Fringe is going to give it 9 as well. I'm really leaning towards 9.5 though. Should I give it a half point? I know it annoys you, so I am quite tempted. No, I'll stick it with a 9. I'll go with a 9. So there we go. So we started with 2 8s on Taxman, we've now got 2 9s for Eleanor Rigby. So at some point, our opinion on something is going to diverge. Do you think it's going to be on I'm Only Sleeping?
Possibly.
Possibly.
Because
Okay,
it's got
well.
a backwards guitar solo.
Oh, your favourite. Good. Well,
But although it will give us a chance to talk about Suggs.
oh well, yeah. I mean, honestly, I should keep. Okay, I should keep this for the next episode. But I'm just going to say it now. When Madness broke up at the end of the '80s, I spent. I said on a number of different occasions. I don't care what Suggs does. I could listen to him sing anything, and then he has spent the rest of his career proving me wrong, and I'm quite annoyed by that.
There was I'm Only Sleeping and Cecilia that probably
Yeah,
really ought to have you. It is worth pointing out, if you doubt the sincerity of JG's passion for Madness, he was one of only 12 people that bought the Madness album when they were the Madness.
I still like 2 songs from that album. It is a
I
terrible,
Pronounce
terrible
You
album.
is brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
It's a brilliant song.
Yeah, yeah.
No interest in listening to the rest of that album.
There's no reason to. It's really bad.
Nope.
Okay, right. Before we descend down this rabbit hole any further, let us draw things to a close. As always, you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Beatles_ology. Nope, I'm still not calling it X. We are Beatles on Instagram.
Sorry, guys,
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt. I did actually tweet something the other day.
Oh, did you?
However, I just happened to be watching sport on last Saturday afternoon and flicking between football scores coming in and racing that was on ITV. And I was particularly interested by the fact that the presenter of ITV's racing was standing in the parade ring at Sandown Park Racecourse. And it was beautifully framed because behind him on the other side of it was what I assume was a hot cocktail stand because it's winter, so hot cocktails. Unfortunately, from where his head is positioned, it looks like he's just standing in front of something saying hot cock. So that's what I posted. At some point, I'll get around to doing something related to Beatles.
Okay, well, listen, if you want to stick to hot cocks, I'm not going to judge you for it.
Are we going to get an E for explicit?
We always do. That's fine. Good. Let's. Well, I've completely lost the thread. Oh, I don't know. Look. My blog's at
Instagram, your blog.
Yeah, jgmcquarrie.scot. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you. I swear we're not drunk. Well, I'm not. I can't speak for you. Whatever podcatcher you're using, so that more people can find the show. Next episode, assuming we're still talking to each other, we will cover I'm Only Sleeping. But until then, please keep listening.